It was a moment that few in Washington expected to see, as Prime Minister Mark Carney stepped onto the red carpet in Kuala Lumpur. ASEAN leaders rose to greet him with applause. Cameras captured a rare sight: Canada at the center of an Asian summit, welcomed not as a visitor, but as a partner. For months, the United States had been raising tariffs, tightening borders, and warning its allies to follow suit. Yet here was Canada, doing the opposite, expanding outward, talking trade, energy, and cooperation. What happened in Malaysia was more than a diplomatic stop. It was a declaration that Canada intends to shape its own future, even if that future no longer revolves around Washington.
We laid out last week that we want to increase our non-U.S. exports by 50% within the next decade, shorter time frame than that. It's about $300 billion to give context to that.
That's a good thing for Canadians to understand, that we're not just on bended knee hoping that Donald Trump will stop doing things that don't make any sense. We're not going to rely on the Americans anymore because they've turned out to be very unreliable, at least under the current administration. So
Carney's trip to Asia was his first as Prime Minister, and he chose the ASEAN summit in Malaysia for a reason. Canada wanted to send a clear message: it is ready to engage directly with the fastest-growing region on Earth. The reception could not have been warmer. Regional newspapers described Canada as a dependable new voice in an uncertain world. In the summit hall, delegates highlighted Canada's consistent support for a rules-based system and fair trade. It was a contrast to the transactional tone that has defined U.S. policy in recent years. ASEAN represents a market of more than 650 million people and a combined GDP exceeding $4 trillion. According to the International Monetary Fund, the region is projected to grow around 4.5% in 2025, making it a crucial partner for any nation seeking long-term economic stability. For Canada, which still sends roughly 75% of its exports to the United States, Statistics Canada 2024, the opportunity was obvious. Carney framed the visit as a turning point, a chance for Canada to connect its advanced industries with Asia's demand for energy, minerals, and technology. He described Canada as a nation that shares ASEAN's values of inclusivity and sustainability. Behind the diplomatic language was a simple truth: Canada was ready to diversify, and Asia was ready to welcome it. Carney laid out a measurable plan. Within 10 years, Canada aims to double its non-U.S. exports by 300 billion Canadian dollars, much of it from Asia. The foundation is energy and innovation. Canada is one of the world's top LNG producers, projected to export 50 million tons annually by 2030. Meanwhile, 85% of its power grid is clean, with expansion focused on small modular nuclear reactors and renewables by 2035. Canada is also advancing in critical minerals through a critical mineral alliance linking its vast resources to Asian demand. The 2025 federal budget pledged to quadruple defense and tech spending over 5 years, prioritizing AI, cybersecurity, and advanced manufacturing. Together, these measures form an industrial strategy that combines energy security, clean technology, and digital strength into one national vision. While Carney was being toasted in Kuala Lumpur, the atmosphere in Washington was tense. President Trump had just threatened another round of 10% tariffs on Canadian imports, citing unfair trade practices. The intention was to pressure Ottawa into compliance. Instead, it triggered something else: acceleration. Canada's pivot to Asia has become a direct response to the very trade barriers meant to contain it. When the U.S. closed its doors, Canada opened new ones. Trade analysts from the Peterson Institute in Washington noted in early October 2025 that tariff escalation is diverting investment and supply chains toward non-U.S. partners. That shift is already visible in the data. According to Global Affairs Canada, exports to Indo-Pacific economies reached 261 billion Canadian dollars in 2024, and new agreements signed with the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and now ASEAN could raise that number by hundreds of billions more within a decade. Every deal reduces the share of Canadian trade tied to the U.S. market. For Washington, this was never part of the plan. Trump's America First approach was supposed to strengthen the U.S. position within North America. Instead, it weakened it. By relying on tariffs as leverage, the administration pushed allies to seek alternatives. The result? Canada is no longer the quiet neighbor adapting to U.S. rules. It is emerging as an independent trade power with its own network across the Pacific.
Carney's vision defines Canada as a nation connecting Western systems with Asia's fast-growing markets. This approach is already reflected in policy. Canada's trade frameworks mix Western transparency with Asian flexibility, supporting carbon pricing and clean energy standards while offering financing models suited to ASEAN economies. By stepping into this space, Canada fills a gap left by Washington's retreat. Leaders across Asia see Ottawa as modern, predictable, and open to practical cooperation. The challenge now is to balance principles with pragmatism, a balance that makes Canada newly relevant in 2025.
The symbolism of this trip resonated far beyond Asia. In Europe, financial newspapers described it as Canada's diplomatic breakout. In Ottawa, economists pointed out that the strategy mirrors global trends, diversification, regional blocs, and the rise of mid-sized powers shaping their own paths. The Financial Times reported on October 24th that Carney's Indo-Pacific initiative could attract over 500 billion Canadian dollars in combined public and private investment over the next decade. That figure aligns with Ottawa's internal projection of a $500 billion growth plan, an ambitious but realistic target given Asia's scale. These moves are changing how global investors see Canada. Once considered an extension of the U.S. economy, it is now viewed as a Pacific gateway for Western capital. The Toronto Stock Exchange's index of resource and tech firms has outperformed the S&P 500 since mid-2025, partly due to optimism over Asian demand for Canadian minerals, energy, and clean tech components. Every handshake in Kuala Lumpur and every announcement in Singapore sends the same message. Canada intends to lead through partnership, not confrontation.
As the ASEAN summit concluded, Carney stood alongside regional leaders beneath the bright stage lights, smiling as the cameras flashed. It was more than a photo opportunity. It was the image of a country quietly transforming its role in the world. Back in Washington, the reaction was muted but unmistakable. Commentators on major networks admitted that America's tariff strategy might have backfired. Canada, once seen as a secondary player, had turned adversity into opportunity. The shift is profound. By choosing collaboration over conflict, Canada has begun to build a new identity, one grounded in confidence, partnership, and independence. It is no longer waiting for permission to act on the world stage. In 2025, while America isolates itself behind its own barriers, Canada is walking into Asia's open doors. The question now is not whether this pivot will succeed, but how far it can go. Because in the global race for influence, this may be the year when Canada finally stops following and starts leading.
No, I think he's a great prime minister. I mean, he could represent me anytime. I will tell you, I'm not saying that because but he could be nasty. He could be very nasty.
If he's a great man and you want to do a deal with Canada, why aren't you?
Because I want to be a great man too.
The cameras in the Oval Office captured what looked like a normal diplomatic moment. Smiles, flags, and two leaders talking about trade. But behind the polished setting, something else was happening. President Donald Trump was trying to defend his economic strategy, and instead of showing control, he showed confusion. The meeting between Trump and Prime Minister Mark Carney was meant to highlight progress. For months, Washington and Ottawa have been locked in a tariff dispute that's hurting both sides. The United States has kept high import taxes on Canadian steel, aluminum, and vehicles, while Canada has held firm, refusing to make concessions without guarantees of stability. Trump wanted to turn this moment into proof that his America First policy was working. Instead, it became a moment that revealed how his message is beginning to backfire.
Trump entered the room with confidence. Carney, calm as ever, stayed focused. The difference between them wasn't just in tone, it was in discipline. Trump spoke to the cameras, Carney spoke to the facts. By the time the press conference ended, Trump's own words had done more to weaken his argument than anything Carney could have said. When reporters asked about trade, Trump jumped from topic to topic. He talked about how both countries want to make cars in steel, then shifted to crime, border security, and even drug boats supposedly destroyed off Venezuela. He claimed the United States now had no fishing boats left because of his crackdown on maritime drug smuggling. None of it had anything to do with tariffs or trade. Then came the numbers. Trump repeated that more than $17 trillion of new investment had poured into the United States in just 8 months. Independent agencies like the Congressional Budget Office and the Bureau of Economic Analysis have no record of any figure close to that. U.S. foreign direct investment for all of 2024 was under $500 billion, according to BEA data. The claims simply didn't fit any verified economic reality. His answers blurred together, mixing pride, anger, and self-promotion. One minute he spoke of love for Canada. The next he accused Canada of taking American car factories. He said the two countries hurt each other when we compete, even as he argued his tariffs were helping both nations. Viewers expecting a clear policy statement saw instead a president struggling to link his thoughts. Trump's unpredictability once drew attention. Now it looked like drift. The questions became shorter. The answers grew longer, wandering into shutdown politics and attacks on Democrats. He spoke about cities like Chicago and Washington as if they were symbols of decline, then suddenly declared them safe again. It left the impression of a leader who could no longer separate the economy from the performance around it. Through it all, Mark Carney stayed mostly silent. When he did speak, his message was structured. Canada, he said, is America's second-largest trading partner and its biggest foreign investor, with $500 billion invested in the U.S. over the past 5 years. The contrast was striking. Trump followed with another round of flattery. He called Carney a great man and a strong leader. The praise kept coming. When a reporter asked why, if Carney was so great, there was still no trade deal, Trump smiled and said, "Because I want to be great too." The laughter that followed was polite but uneasy. Carney smiled lightly and let the silence do the work. In that silence, Trump's showmanship lost its edge. What should have been a demonstration of authority became a reminder that charisma without clarity cannot move policy. Trump's compliments might have been genuine, but they carried a tone of insecurity. By lifting Carney so high, he shifted the spotlight away from himself. The press conference became a showcase of contrast, a disciplined Canadian leader beside an American president drifting between ego and admiration. The confusion on display mirrors what's happening in the real economy. Since early 2025, Trump's tariff strategy has driven up costs for U.S. manufacturers that depend on Canadian materials. According to data from the Department of Commerce, import costs for aluminum and steel from Canada rose nearly 18% by August. Automakers in Michigan and Ohio report delays in component delivery and increased expenses that have already forced temporary layoffs. At the same time, Canadian exports to the United States have become more expensive, slowing production on both sides of the border. Carney's government has responded by investing in domestic critical mineral projects and negotiating with Europe and Asia for alternative markets. In short, Canada adapted. The U.S. absorbed the inflation. Trump's tariffs were supposed to strengthen American industry. Instead, they've exposed how deeply interdependent North America's economy really is. Even Trump's supporters in the industrial Midwest are now warning that prolonged tariffs could cost more jobs than they save. The Oval Office meeting was Trump's chance to reset the story, to show leadership, to present a path forward. But the world saw a president tangled in his own narrative. His claims inflated, his focus evaporated. By the time he declared that America is the hottest country in the world right now, the contrast with Canada's calm tone could not have been sharper. When the meeting ended, there was no new deal, no policy shift, no breakthrough. But there was a clear impression. Trump's show of strength had turned into a show of weakness. The same tariffs that were meant to project dominance are now isolating America from its closest ally. Mark Carney left Washington with quiet confidence. Trump left with applause, but also with headlines questioning his command of the facts. The contrast told its own story. Canada stayed patient and consistent. The United States, under Trump's shifting narrative, looked divided and uncertain. What was meant to project power ended as self-exposure. Trump's tariffs hurt his economy. His words hurt his credibility. And the Oval Office, the stage of presidential authority, became the mirror that showed how a leader's performance can undo the very power he tries to display.